He raised triplets like his own, pouring his heart into a love so unconditional it overcame every obstacle. But years later, a single note arrives, and it shatters his world. It's not just a message, it's a key to a secret that threatens to destroy the life he built with them. As whispers of a powerful man's involvement surface, one question becomes unavoidable. Will the truth bring his family closer, or tear them apart forever? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The early morning sun cast long shadows across Carlo Hart's modest suburban home as he methodically went through his daily routine. The coffee maker gurgled in the kitchen while he folded the laundry he'd left in the dryer overnight, each movement precise and practiced. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Just as it had been for the past 2 years. He paused at the mantel, his hand automatically reaching out to straighten a silver picture frame. Jessica's smile beamed back at him, her dark hair catching the sunlight in the photograph taken on their wedding day. His throat tightened as he remembered her laugh, the way her eyes would crinkle at the corners when she was happy. "Miss you, Jess," he whispered, his fingers lingering on the cool glass. At the firehouse, Carlo found comfort in the familiar bustle of activity. The smell of coffee and the sound of good-natured banter filled the common room as he stored his gear in his locker. "Hart, just in time for breakfast," called out Mike Thompson, one of the veteran firefighters, as he flipped pancakes on the industrial stove. "You're looking too skinny these days, brother." Carlo managed a small smile. "Thanks, Mike, but I grabbed something at home." "You always say that." Mike shook his head, concern evident in his weathered face. The day passed in a blur of equipment checks, training drills, and 2 minor calls, a kitchen fire and a false alarm at an elementary school. As evening approached, memories of Jessica crept in, unbidden. He remembered their last morning together, how she'd kissed him goodbye before heading to her job as a school counselor. The fire that took her had started in the teacher's lounge. She'd gone back in to make sure everyone was out. They'd found her near 2 unconscious students she'd managed to drag to safety. The night shift was usually quiet, and Carlo had settled into his bunk with a book when he heard it, a soft cry carried on the winter wind. At first he thought he'd imagined it, but then it came again, more insistent this time. Following the sound, Carlo made his way to the station's front entrance. There, nestled in a wicker basket lined with warm blankets, lay 3 tiny babies. Their faces were pink from crying, their little fists waving in the cold night air. "Oh my God," he breathed, immediately scooping up the basket and bringing it inside. "Mike, call dispatch. We need medical here now." The babies were identical. Triplets, the paramedics would later confirm. As Carlo carefully lifted each one out to check for signs of distress, a folded piece of paper fluttered to the floor. With trembling hands, he picked it up and read the single line written in hurried script. "Protect them at all costs." The girls were perfectly healthy according to the EMTs who arrived minutes later. As Carlo cradled one of them, her tiny hand wrapped around his finger with surprising strength. Something stirred in his chest, an emotion he hadn't felt since Jessica died. "They'll need names for the paperwork," one of the paramedics said softly. Carlo looked down at the 3 precious faces. The one in his arms had just opened her eyes, revealing a gaze so trusting it made his heart ache. "Grace," he said, the name coming to him naturally. Looking at the second baby, who was sleeping peacefully despite the commotion, he added, "Lily." The third, who had been crying but was now watching everything with curious eyes, he named Hope. As he sat there in the quiet firehouse, surrounded by his concerned colleagues and holding these 3 innocent lives, Carlo felt something he thought he'd lost forever. Purpose. These girls needed someone to protect them, to love them. And for the first time since losing Jessica, he felt ready to answer a call that went beyond his duty as a firefighter. The social worker arrived just before dawn, her heels clicking against the firehouse floor with businesslike precision. Jillian White's face was a mask of professional detachment as she surveyed the scene. 3 babies sleeping peacefully in makeshift beds crafted from supply boxes and blankets, with Carlo Hart watching over them like a protective guardian. "Mr. Hart," she said, consulting her clipboard. I understand you were the one who found them? Carlo nodded, his eyes never leaving the triplets. Yes, around midnight. They're healthy, according to the paramedics. As if sensing the tension in the air, Grace stirred first, her tiny face scrunching up before letting out a piercing wail. Within seconds, Lily and Hope joined their sister in a chorus of distress. Carlo moved instinctively, gathering Grace in his arms while speaking softly to all three. It's okay, sweethearts, everything's going to be fine. To everyone's surprise, Grace's cries began to soften at his touch. Lily and Hope, however, continued their protest until Carlo managed to gather all three close to him, creating a protective circle with his broad shoulders. Mr. Hart, Jillian began, her professional tone wavering slightly. I need to arrange immediate emergency placement for the girls. The baby's cries intensified at her words. Carlo felt their tiny bodies trembling against his chest, and something inside him shifted, a decision crystallizing in his heart. I'll take them, he said quietly. Jillian blinked. I'm sorry. I want to apply for temporary custody. His voice grew stronger with each word. I have the space, a stable job, and savings. I can provide for them. Marcus Levine, who had been watching from nearby, stepped forward. Carlo's one of our best, Ms. White. If anyone can handle this responsibility, it's him. Jillian's expression softened as she watched Carlo soothing the triplets. Mr. Hart, raising 3 infants alone, it's an enormous undertaking. Are you sure about this? I've never been more sure of anything, Carlo replied, looking down at the now quiet babies in his arms. They need someone to protect them. That note left with them. It feels like more than just a request. It feels like a calling. After several long moments, Jillian nodded slowly. I can arrange temporary custody, but there will be a 6-month probationary period, regular check-ins, mandatory parenting classes, and home visits. Whatever it takes, Carlo agreed immediately. Later that night, Carlo and Marcus found themselves in the baby section of a 24-hour superstore, their shopping carts filling quickly with essentials. 3 of everything, Marcus muttered, tossing in packages of diapers. You're going to need a bigger car, brother. Carlo was studying baby bottles with intense concentration. I'll figure it out. Jessica always said. He paused, swallowing hard. She always said that love finds a way. Marcus placed a supportive hand on his friend's shoulder. She'd be proud of you, you know. Taking on 3 little ones, that's something special. As they loaded supplies into Carlo's truck, the reality of his decision began to sink in. 3 car seats, 3 cribs, countless diapers and bottles. The logistics were daunting. But then he remembered the way Grace had gripped his finger, how Lily had settled instantly in his arms, and how Hope's eyes had tracked his every movement. Something about these girls called to the empty spaces in his heart, spaces that had been silent since Jessica's death. I'll help you set everything up, Marcus offered, closing the truck's tailgate. We can convert your home office into a nursery. The whole crew will pitch in. You know that, right? Carlo nodded, feeling overwhelmed but determined. 1 step at a time, he said, more to himself than to Marcus. 1 step at a time. The first week with the triplets tested every skill Carlo had learned as a firefighter, and then some. Emergency response training hadn't prepared him for simultaneous diaper changes or the logistics of feeding 3 hungry babies at once. Late one night, as he attempted to warm 3 bottles while holding a crying Hope, he discovered that multitasking with infants required an entirely new set of skills. The bottle warmer hummed softly as he swayed back and forth, trying to comfort the fussy baby. Almost there, sweetheart, he murmured, just as Grace began to cry from her bassinet in the living room. The sound triggered Lily, and suddenly the modest house filled with a chorus of infant distress. Carlo looked at the bottle warmer's timer, still 2 minutes to go. Okay, we can do this, he said, moving carefully to check on Grace while still holding Hope. The kitchen timer dinged just as he reached down to comfort Grace with his free hand. Need some backup? Marcus's voice came from the doorway. He had used his spare key, a gesture that had become increasingly common over the past week. Perfect timing, Carlo said, relief evident in his voice. Can you grab those bottles?" Together, they managed to get all 3 girls fed, though not without incident. Hope decided to spit up on Carlo's last clean uniform shirt, while Grace somehow managed to get more formula on Marcus's arm than in her mouth. "You know," Marcus said, wiping formula from his sleeve, "I never thought I'd see the day when tough guy Carlo Hart would be covered in baby spit up and looking this happy about it." Carlo couldn't help but smile as he burped Lily. Neither did I. The nursery was coming together slowly but surely. The crew from the firehouse had helped paint the walls a soft yellow, and Carlo had spent his rare free moments adding personal touches. Above each crib, he'd hung wooden letters spelling out their names, hand-painted in different pastel colors. A rocking chair sat in the corner, Jessica's old chair, brought down from the attic and refinished. One afternoon, while the girls were miraculously napping at the same time, Carlo found himself organizing the closet in the nursery. In a box of baby supplies, he came across the note that had been left with the girls. The paper was crumpled now, but the words remained clear. Protect them at all costs. He sat in the rocking chair studying the handwriting, looking for any clue about where these precious girls had come from. The paper was ordinary, the pen standard black ink. Nothing distinctive, nothing to hint at their origins. A soft whimper from Lily's crib pulled him from his thoughts. He tucked the note away and went to her, lifting her gently before she could wake her sisters. As he settled into the rocking chair with her, Lily's tiny hand wrapped around his finger. "You know what?" he whispered to her. "Where you came from doesn't matter nearly as much as where you are now." He looked at Grace and Hope, still sleeping peacefully. "And right now, you're home." The sleepless nights continued, marked by midnight feedings and early morning diaper changes. Carlo learned to function on coffee and cat naps, catching sleep whenever the girls did. He discovered that Grace wouldn't settle without her pink blanket, that Lily preferred to be held over his left shoulder, and that Hope would only take her bottle if she was cradled just so. These small details, these intimate moments of care and connection, began to weave themselves into the fabric of his daily life. The girls' needs became as natural to him as breathing, their presence filling his once quiet house with a chaotic sort of joy he hadn't known he was missing. The seasons changed, painting the suburban landscape in new colors as the triplets grew stronger and more active with each passing day. 6 months had transformed Carlo's home from a quiet sanctuary into a vibrant nursery, filled with the sounds of baby giggles and the scattered evidence of 3 growing personalities. When Jillian White arrived for her scheduled check-in, she found a different scene than she'd expected. The house, while showing clear signs of active babies, maintained a warm and organized atmosphere. Carlo had installed safety gates, covered electrical outlets, and arranged the living room to create a safe play area filled with educational toys. "I have to admit, Mr. Hart," Jillian said, watching as Grace determinedly pulled herself up using the coffee table. "I'm impressed. You've exceeded our expectations." Carlo smiled, gently redirecting Lily from putting a plastic block in her mouth. "They make it easy," he said, though the dark circles under his eyes told the story of countless sleepless nights. "They each have their own way of letting me know exactly what they need." Hope, crawling at remarkable speed, made her way to Jillian's feet and lifted her arms in the universal signal to be picked up. The social worker obliged, unable to resist the baby's infectious smile. "Dada." The word came clear and strong from Grace's direction, stopping everyone in the room. Carlo's heart seemed to skip a beat as he turned to look at her. She repeated it, more insistent this time. "Dada." Lily, not to be outdone, echoed her sister. "Dada." And within moments, Hope joined the chorus from Jillian's arms. Tears welled in Carlo's eyes as he gathered Grace and Lily close. The moment felt surreal, perfect, and somehow bittersweet. Later that night, after putting the girls to bed, he found himself watching an old video on his phone. Jessica, radiant in her. Carlo sat in the quiet living room, watching the girls sleep on their playmat after an exhausting afternoon of crawling and exploring. The setting sun cast a warm glow through the windows, highlighting their peaceful faces. In his hands, he held a leather-bound journal, a gift from Marcus that had remained empty until now. With a deep breath, he began to write, "Dear Jessica, today the girls called me Dada for the first time. I wish you could have heard it." The words flowed easier than he expected, filling page after page with memories of tiny victories and daily challenges. He wrote about Grace's determination to stand, Lily's gentle way of patting her sisters when they cried, and Hope's contagious laughter that could light up the darkest room. At the firehouse the next day, Marcus found Carlo in the break room, the journal open before him. "You're actually using it," Marcus observed, sliding into the chair across from him. "Good. It's about time you let some of that stuff out." Carlo nodded, closing the journal carefully. "These girls, Marcus, they've given me something I thought I'd lost forever." His voice wavered slightly. "A reason to wake up excited about the day ahead. That's called being a father, my friend," Marcus said, his eyes kind. "And from where I'm sitting, you're doing a pretty amazing job at it." Later that week, Carlo brought the triplets to the firehouse for their first visit. He carried them in their triple stroller, which barely fit through the station's wide doors. The entire crew gathered around, cooing and making silly faces at the babies. Grace immediately reached for the shiny buttons on Chief Thompson's uniform, while Lily observed everything with wide, curious eyes. Hope, true to her nature, giggled and charmed everyone in sight. "This is where Daddy works," Carlo explained softly, showing them the big red fire truck. "This is where I found you." His voice caught in his throat as he remembered that night, how close he'd come to turning away from the responsibility that now gave his life such profound meaning. That evening, as he wrote in his journal, Carlo reflected on how the grief that had once consumed him was slowly transforming into something else. Not gone, but different. The ache of missing Jessica would always be there, but it no longer paralyzed him. Instead, it had become part of the foundation supporting his new role as a father. "The girls visited the station today," he wrote. "I showed them where their journey with me began. Sometimes I wonder if you had something to do with bringing them to me, Jess. They're healing parts of me I thought would stay broken forever." Marcus stopped by after his shift, bringing dinner and his usual encouraging presence. As they watched the girls play with their blocks on the floor, he turned to Carlo. "You know, these little ones didn't just save you, you saved them too. That's what family does." Carlo looked at his daughters because that's truly what they were now, in his heart, if not yet legally, and felt a surge of protective love so strong it nearly overwhelmed him. Grace was stacking blocks with fierce concentration. Lily was carefully arranging them by color, and Hope was more interested in crawling over them than building with them. "They're my whole world now," Carlo said simply, and in those 5 words was everything he'd been afraid to admit since that first night at the firehouse. The small suburban house buzzed with excitement as colorful balloons bobbed against the ceiling, and streamers decorated every corner. Carlo stood in his living room, watching as Grace, Lily, and Hope sat in their high chairs, each wearing tiny party dresses in different pastel shades. "I can't believe it's been a year," Marcus said, helping Carlo arrange 3 identical smash cakes on the tray tables. "Seems like yesterday we were fumbling with those first midnight feedings." Carlo's mind drifted to a conversation he'd had with Jessica years ago, sitting on their back porch on a warm summer evening. "We'll have the best birthday parties," she'd said, her eyes sparkling with dreams of the future. "Nothing too fancy, just full of love and laughter." The memory made his heart ache, but the sound of Hope's delighted squeal brought him back to the present. His co-workers from the firehouse filled the room with their families, and a few neighbors had stopped by with gifts and well wishes. "Okay, birthday girls," Carlo announced, positioning himself to capture photos. "Time for cake." Each girl approached their cake differently. Grace attacked hers with determination, frosting soon covering her face and hands. Lily delicately poked at hers, more interested in the texture than eating it. Hope seemed content to simply smash her hands into the dessert, creating a magnificent mess that had everyone laughing. As Carlo watched them, another memory surfaced. Jessica showing him ultrasound pictures at the hospital where she volunteered. "Someday," she'd whispered, squeezing his hand, "someday, this will be us." The party continued with presents and games, the triplets thoroughly entertained by the wrapping paper more than the gifts themselves. Chief Thompson had brought 3 identical teddy bears wearing firefighter helmets, which immediately became favorites. As the afternoon wound down and guests began to leave, Carlo noticed Jillian White standing near the kitchen entrance, her expression unusually serious. She gestured for him to join her in a quiet corner. "I hate to bring this up today," she began, keeping her voice low, "but I needed to tell you in person. We've found a match in the National DNA database." Carlo's heart seemed to stop. "What kind of match?" "The girls appear to be related to the Morrison family," Jillian said carefully. "They're quite influential in local politics and business." The room suddenly felt too warm. Carlo glanced at his daughters, now being entertained by Marcus with a puppet show. How certain is the match?" "Certain enough that we're legally obligated to investigate further." Jillian touched his arm gently. "I wanted you to hear it from me first." After the last guest left and the girls were asleep in their cribs, Carlo sat at his kitchen table, the mysterious note spread out before him. "Protect them at all costs," he read again, studying each word carefully. The paper was expensive, he realized now, the kind used for formal correspondence. The handwriting, while hurried, showed signs of refined penmanship. His fingers traced the words, remembering how many times he'd read this note over the past year. Now, with Jillian's revelation, every curve of each letter seemed to hold possible clues he'd missed before. "I will protect you," he whispered, thinking of his sleeping daughters. "No matter what comes next, I will protect you." The promise felt heavier now, weighted with the knowledge that somewhere out there, someone knew exactly who these girls were and why they'd been left in his care. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen windows as Carlo prepared breakfast for the girls. Grace and Lily were absorbed in their picture books, while Hope methodically arranged her cereal pieces into patterns on her high chair tray. The doorbell's chime broke through their peaceful routine. Jillian White stood on his doorstep, her usual professional demeanor replaced by obvious tension. "We need to talk, Carlo. Privately." After settling the girls with their favorite educational show, Carlo joined Jillian in the kitchen, his stomach nodding at her expression. "The DNA results came back with more specific information," Jillian began, her voice low. "The girls are related to Senator Daniel Harrington." Carlo gripped the kitchen counter. Everyone knew about Senator Harrington, his aggressive political campaigns, his reputation for ruthlessness, and the whispered rumors about his personal life that never quite made it to print. "How certain are you?" Carlo's voice was barely above a whisper. "The genetic match is conclusive." Jillian pulled out some papers from her briefcase. "This could complicate things significantly. Senator Harrington has considerable influence, and if he decides to pursue custody—" "He abandoned them," Carlo cut in, his protective instincts flaring. "Left them at a firehouse in the middle of the night." "We don't know the full story yet," Jillian cautioned. "But you should be prepared. The senator's legal team will be formidable if he chooses to get involved." Carlo ran his hands through his hair, glancing toward the living room where he could hear the girls giggling at their show. "What are my options?" "Right now, your temporary custody remains unchanged, but I want you to be realistic about what we're facing. Senator Harrington has resources and connections that could make this very difficult." "They're my daughters," Carlo said firmly, though his voice trembled slightly. "I've been there for every fever, every nightmare, every first word. They belong here, with me." Jillian's expression softened. "I know, Carlo, and I'm on your side, but we need to handle this carefully." After Jillian left, Carlo spent the afternoon trying to maintain normalcy for the girls, but his mind kept racing with worried thoughts. As he prepared their dinner, he heard the sound of paper crinkling. His heart nearly stopped when he saw Grace sitting on the living room floor, the mysterious note in her small hands. She wasn't reading it, she was too young for that, but she was tracing the letters with her finger, just as he had done countless times. "Daddy?" Grace looked up at him with those intelligent eyes that sometimes seemed too wise for her age. "Where's my real mommy and daddy?" The innocent question hit him like a physical blow. Lily and Hope continued playing with their blocks nearby, oblivious to the weight of their sister's words. Carlo crossed the room and sat down next to Grace, gently taking the note from her hands. "You know how much I love you, right?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. Grace nodded, crawling into his lap. "But Tommy at daycare says everyone has a mommy and daddy. Where's ours?" Carlo wrapped his arms around her, breathing in the sweet smell of her baby shampoo. His mind raced with thoughts of Senator Harrington, of custody battles, of everything that could go wrong. But looking at Grace's innocent face, he knew he had to protect her from these harsh realities for as long as possible. "Sometimes," he began carefully, "families look different from what Tommy might think is normal. But what matters most is how much we love each other." Grace seemed to consider this, her small brow furrowed in concentration. "Do you love us enough for a mommy and daddy?" Tears pricked at Carlo's eyes as he hugged her closer. "I love you more than anything in this whole world. You and your sisters are my everything." Late into the night, after tucking the girls into bed, Carlo sat at his kitchen table with his laptop open. The soft glow of the screen illuminated his worried face as he scrolled through articles about Senator Daniel Harrington. The politician's polished smile beamed from countless photos at charity events, campaign rallies, and press conferences. "A dedicated public servant," one headline proclaimed. "Harrington's rise to political stardom," declared another. But as Carlo dug deeper, troubling patterns emerged. Buried beneath the glossy surface were whispers of darker truths. Allegations quickly settled out of court, staff members who disappeared from his office without explanation, and rumors about a first marriage that ended mysteriously. Carlo's stomach churned as he read about the senator's ex-wife, who had vanished from public life years ago. No photos, no statements, just a brief mention of a private divorce settlement, and then nothing. The timing nagged at him. It was around the same time the girls had been left at the firehouse. The next morning at work, Carlo's distraction didn't go unnoticed. As he mechanically checked the fire truck's equipment, Marcus Levine approached him. "All right, what's eating at you?" Marcus asked, leaning against the truck. "You've checked that same gauge 3 times. Carlo's shoulders slumped. Marcus had been there since the beginning, helping him figure out how to change diapers and warm bottles during those first overwhelming weeks with the girls. "They found a DNA match," Carlo said quietly, making sure no other firefighters were within earshot. "The girls, they're related to Senator Harrington." Marcus let out a low whistle. "Daniel Harrington? The one running for re-election?" Carlo nodded, running a hand over his tired face. "I've been researching him. Something feels off, Marcus. The timing of his divorce, the way certain stories about him just disappear." "Listen," Marcus said, placing a steady hand on Carlo's shoulder. "Those girls are your world. I've watched you become the father they need, but you've got to be smart about this. Harrington has power, money, and an army of lawyers." "I can't lose them," Carlo's voice cracked. "They're everything to me." "Then you fight smart," Marcus advised. "Document everything. Keep records. Build your case quietly. Those girls need you thinking clearly, not panicking." That night, exhausted from worry, Carlo fell into a troubled sleep. In his dreams, he found himself back in the firehouse on the night he discovered the girls. But this time, Jessica stood there, bathed in a soft light, holding the basket with the 3 babies. She looked just as she had in their last photo together, her kind eyes bright, her smile gentle. "You found them for a reason," Dream Jessica said, her voice achingly familiar. "They need your protection, just like the people we swore to serve and protect." "I'm scared, Jess," Carlo admitted in the dream. "What if I'm not strong enough?" Jessica's smile widened as she placed the basket in his arms. "You've always been strongest when fighting for others. These girls are your purpose now. Don't let fear stop you from being the father they deserve." Carlo woke with a start, his cheeks wet with tears. The house was quiet, except for the soft whirring of the baby monitor. He could hear Hope's gentle snoring, Lily's occasional murmur, and Grace's steady breathing, the soundtrack of his life now. As he lay there in the dark, Jessica's words echoed in his mind. The fear was still there, but something else was stronger now. Determination. These girls weren't just his responsibility. They were his family, and he would fight with everything he had to keep them safe. The peaceful morning shattered with the first camera flash. Carlo had just finished helping the girls with breakfast when he noticed the gathering crowd outside his modest home. News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky like metal trees. Reporters clutched microphones, their voices carrying through the windows as they delivered their breaking news. DNA results confirm Senator Harrington's connection to the triplets. Questions arise about the circumstances of their abandonment. Foster father Carlo Hart, a local firefighter. Grace pressed her face against the living room window, her small hands leaving prints on the glass. "Daddy, why are all those people outside?" Carlo gently pulled her away from the window, drawing the curtains closed. Lily huddled close to his leg while Hope, usually bubbling with energy, sat quietly on the couch, her eyes wide with confusion. "They're just being nosy," Carlo explained, trying to keep his voice light. "But we don't have to talk to them." His phone buzzed constantly. Messages from the firehouse, calls from unknown numbers, and finally, a text from Marcus. "Saw the news. Need help?" Carlo's fingers trembled slightly as he typed back. "Can the girls stay with you this weekend?" Marcus's response was immediate. "Of course. Back door still clear?" Through the kitchen window, Carlo could see that the media circus hadn't yet discovered the alley behind his house. He packed small overnight bags for the girls, trying to make it seem like an adventure rather than an escape. "You're going to have a special sleepover at Uncle Marcus's house," he told them, forcing cheerfulness into his voice. "He's got that big backyard you love, remember?" Later that afternoon, in the quiet of his empty house, Carlo sat across from Jillian White and Susan Alvarez, a family lawyer recommended by the fire department's union. Susan's kind face carried a determined set to her jaw as she reviewed the paperwork spread across the dining room table. "Your fostering record is impeccable," Jillian assured him. "The home visits, the girls' medical checkups, their developmental progress, everything shows you're providing an excellent environment." "But will that be enough?" Carlo asked, his voice hoarse. Susan leaned forward, her reading glasses perched on her nose. "Blood ties carry weight, but they're not everything. We can build a strong case around the girls' established attachment to you, their emotional well-being, and the stability you provide." The sharp ring of Carlo's phone cut through their discussion. An unfamiliar number flashed on the screen. "Mr. Hart?" The woman's voice was crisp, professional. "This is Victoria Crane, representing Senator Harrington's interests. The senator would like to discuss this situation privately, away from the media circus. Would you be amenable to a meeting?" Carlo's eyes met Susan's, who nodded slowly. "When and where?" he asked, his throat tight. "Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. at the Carlton Hotel's private dining room. Just you and the senator's representatives. No press, no drama." After hanging up, Carlo slumped in his chair. Through the walls, he could still hear the murmur of the crowd outside, their presence a constant reminder of how quickly his peaceful life had unraveled. "I'll go with you," Susan offered, gathering her papers. "Whatever they're planning, you shouldn't face it alone." Carlo nodded, grateful for her support but terrified of what tomorrow might bring. His eyes drifted to the family photo on the wall, him and the girls at their first birthday party, their faces smeared with cake and pure joy. Everything he loved, everything he'd built with them, now hung by a thread. The Carlton Hotel's marble floors gleamed beneath Carlo's worn work boots as he followed a uniformed staff member to the private dining room. Susan Alvarez walked beside him, her heels clicking purposefully with each step. The room they entered was elegant, with crystal chandeliers and dark wood paneling that made Carlo feel out of place in his best button-down shirt. Victoria Crane stood as they entered, her tailored suit probably worth more than Carlo's monthly salary. Her smile didn't reach her eyes as she gestured to the chairs across from her. "Mr. Hart, I was under the impression this would be a private meeting," she said, eyeing Susan. "Ms. Alvarez is here as my legal counsel," Carlo replied firmly, pulling out a chair. Victoria's smile tightened. Very well. She opened a leather portfolio and removed several documents. Senator Harrington is prepared to be quite generous, Mr. Hart. We understand you've formed an attachment to the girls, and we want to acknowledge your care for them. She slid a document across the table. Carlo's eyes widened at the number of zeros on the check attached to it. This compensation would allow you to relocate, perhaps start fresh. Victoria continued smoothly. The girls would have access to the finest schools, healthcare, opportunities that, frankly, your salary couldn't provide. They would want for nothing. Carlo's hands clenched under the table. Accept love, he said quietly. Accept the stability and family they already have. Victoria's perfectly manicured nails tapped the table. Mr. Hart, let's be realistic. You're a single father working long shifts at a dangerous job. The senator can offer round-the-clock care, private tutors, summer homes. The girls aren't for sale. Carlo cut in, his voice sharp. They're not accessories for the senator's image. This isn't about image. Victoria's tone cooled considerably. This is about blood ties and providing the best possible future for these children. If you force us to pursue this legally, it could become unpleasant. Your history of grief counseling after your wife's death, the long hours you work, the potential trauma to the girls, all of it could come under scrutiny. Susan leaned forward. Are you threatening my client, Ms. Crane? Not at all. I'm simply outlining potential legal avenues we might need to explore. Victoria gathered her papers. Think about it, Mr. Hart. Think about what's truly best for the girls. The drive home was silent, Carlo's knuckles white on the steering wheel. When he arrived, he found Marcus waiting on his porch, having brought the girls back from their weekend stay. Inside, as the girls played in their room, Carlo recounted the meeting to Marcus in hushed tones. They tried to buy them, Marcus, like they were picking out puppies at a store. Those heartless... Marcus stopped abruptly, his eyes fixing on something behind Carlo. Grace stood in the doorway, her small face serious. Were you talking about our real parents? Carlo's heart sank. Grace, honey, how long have you been standing there? Long enough, she said, moving closer. Is that why those people were outside with cameras? Because our real parents want us back? Carlo knelt down to her level, his throat tight. Grace, He struggled to find the right words, torn between protecting her and being honest. Do they want to take us away? Her voice trembled slightly, and Carlo could see tears forming in her eyes. Marcus quietly excused himself, leaving Carlo facing the hardest conversation he'd ever had with his daughter. The sound of Lily and Hope laughing drifted down from upstairs, oblivious to the weight of the moment happening below. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen windows as Carlo packed lunches for the girls. 12 years old now, they had their own preferences. Hope loved peanut butter and banana, Lily insisted on cucumber sandwiches with no crust, and Grace barely touched her food these days. He heard them before he saw them, their footsteps thundering down the stairs. Hope bounced into the kitchen first, her pigtails swinging. Lily followed quietly, already dressed in her neat school uniform. Grace trailed behind, her phone clutched tightly in her hand, dark circles under her eyes. Grace, you've barely touched your breakfast, Carlo said, sliding her lunch bag across the counter. She shrugged, not meeting his eyes. Not hungry. Later that afternoon, while cleaning Grace's room, Carlo found a crumpled paper behind her desk. His heart stopped when he saw the official letterhead, Office of Senator Daniel Harrington. The response was formal but warm, mentioning a scheduled meeting with a staff member. When Grace returned from school, Carlo was waiting in the living room, the letter in his hand. Want to tell me about this? Grace froze in the doorway, her backpack sliding off her shoulder. Hope and Lily, sensing tension, quickly disappeared upstairs. You went through my stuff? Grace's voice cracked with anger. I was cleaning your room and found this. Carlo held up the letter. You contacted him? Without telling me? Because you never tell me anything. Grace's words exploded out of her. Everyone at school knows who we are now. They whisper about us in the halls. I deserve to know where I came from. Grace, there are things you don't understand. Stop treating me like a baby. She snatched the letter from his hand. "I'm old enough to know the truth. Why won't you let me meet him? Are you afraid we'll like him better?" The accusation hit Carlo like a physical blow. "This isn't about that." "Then what is it about?" Tears streamed down Grace's face. "Maybe you don't really love us. Maybe you just felt sorry for us because your wife died and you were lonely." The silence that followed was deafening. Carlo stepped back, his face pale. Above them, a door clicked shut. Lily or Hope, probably listening. "Grace," Carlo's voice was barely above a whisper. "You and your sisters are everything to me. Everything. But there are dangers you don't know about." "More secrets?" Grace spat. "I'm done with secrets. I'm meeting with his office tomorrow after school, and you can't stop me." She turned and ran upstairs, leaving Carlo standing alone in the living room, the weight of 12 years of love and protection suddenly feeling inadequate against the storm of a daughter's pain and confusion. The school auditorium buzzed with excitement as parents filled the seats for the spring play. Carlo's empty chair in the front row stood out like a reminder of his absence. Grace, Lily, and Hope peeked through the stage curtains, their matching costumes glittering under the lights. "Dad's still not here," Hope whispered, her lower lip trembling. Lily squeezed her hand. "He'll make it, he always does." Grace said nothing, but her eyes kept scanning the crowd. That's when she noticed him. Senator Daniel Harrington, sitting near the back, his silver hair and expensive suit making him stand out among the casual parents. The play was halfway through when Carlo finally slipped in, still smelling of smoke from the house fire he'd helped contain. His heart swelled watching his girls on stage. Hope's enthusiastic dancing, Lily's perfect delivery of her lines, and Grace's confident solo. As the audience applauded the final bow, Carlo's eyes landed on Harrington. His stomach tightened at the sight of the senator's calculated smile. After the show, parents and children mingled in the lobby. Carlo was hugging the girls when Harrington approached, his presence commanding immediate attention. "What a wonderful performance," Harrington said, his voice smooth as silk. "You must be Grace, Lily, and Hope. I'm an old family friend." Hope beamed at the attention. Lily shifted closer to Carlo. Grace's eyes widened with recognition. "You're Senator Harrington," Grace said, stepping forward. "I've seen you on TV." Harrington's smile grew wider. "Indeed I am. Your performance was particularly impressive, Grace. You have quite a gift." Carlo's arm tightened around Lily's shoulders. "Girls, why don't you go get changed? I need to speak with the senator." Once the girls were out of earshot, Harrington's charm dimmed slightly. "They're remarkable children, Mr. Hart. Surely you can understand my interest in them." "Let's be clear," Carlo's voice was low and firm. "I know about your past, the abuse allegations your ex-wife made before she disappeared." "Unfortunate rumors," Harrington replied smoothly. "All dismissed in court. I simply want to be part of their lives. They are, after all, connected to me." "DNA doesn't make you family." Carlo stepped closer. "Stay away from my daughters." Harrington's smile turned cold. "Your daughters? We both know that's not entirely accurate. This doesn't have to be unpleasant, Mr. Hart. I have resources, influence, things that could benefit the girls tremendously." "Is that a threat?" "Consider it a reality check." Harrington straightened his tie. "I'll be seeing you again, Mr. Hart. And the girls too." The days following the school play were filled with a heavy silence in the Hart household. Carlo found himself checking on the girls more frequently, peeking into their rooms at night, and asking more questions about their daily activities. His protective instincts were in overdrive, but with Grace, his concern only seemed to push her further away. One afternoon, while the girls were supposedly doing homework, Carlo noticed Grace hunched over her laptop, quickly minimizing a window when he walked past. "Grace?" he asked, his heart racing. "What are you working on?" "Just homework," she mumbled, but her fingers nervously tapped the keyboard. Carlo stepped closer. "Please don't lie to me. Show me what you were doing." Grace's face flushed with anger, but Carlo was faster. He gently turned the laptop toward him, revealing an email chain with Senator Harrington's office. "How long?" Carlo's voice cracked. "How long have you been talking to him?" "Since the play," Grace admitted defiantly. "He's been telling me about my real mom." The words hit Carlo like a physical blow. Lily and Hope, who had been quietly reading nearby, looked up with worried expressions. "Grace," Carlo said, trying to keep his voice steady. "You don't understand what kind of man he is." "No, you don't understand," Grace pushed back from the desk. "You've been keeping secrets from us our whole lives. We deserve to know where we came from." Lily stepped forward. "Grace, maybe Dad's just trying to protect us." "He's not our real dad," Grace shouted, tears streaming down her face. "And he won't even tell us who is." Hope started crying and Lily wrapped an arm around her younger sister. The room felt too small, too hot, too full of hurt. Carlo knelt down in front of Grace's chair. "You're right. I'm not your biological father. But every single day since you girls came into my life, I have loved you as my own. I've been there for every fever, every nightmare, every skinned knee." "But," Grace started. "No, please listen," Carlo continued, his voice thick with emotion. "I lost your mother, my wife Jessica, and I thought I'd never find a reason to live again. Then you three came into my life. I may not share your DNA, but I have given everything I have to be the father you deserve." Grace's lower lip trembled. "Then why won't you tell us the truth about where we came from?" "Because sometimes the truth is complicated," Carlo replied, reaching for her hand. "And sometimes people who seem charming and kind aren't what they appear to be. Senator Harrington says he can give us opportunities you can't." Grace pulled her hand away. "He says we deserve better." The words struck deep and Carlo felt his heart breaking. "Maybe he can give you material things I can't, but everything I've done, everything I am, has been for you girls." Grace stood up abruptly, tears streaming down her face. "I don't believe you anymore." She ran from the room, leaving Carlo kneeling there, devastated. Hope's quiet sobs filled the silence while Lily stood frozen between her sister's retreat and her father's pain. That evening, after the girls had gone to bed, Carlo sat at his kitchen table surrounded by newspaper clippings and printouts. His laptop glowed in the dim light as he scrolled through archived articles about Senator Harrington. Marcus Levine sat across from him, pushing a manila folder across the table. "You need to see this, Carlo," Marcus said quietly. "I called in some favors at the courthouse. These records were sealed, but my contact got them unsealed." Carlo's hands trembled as he opened the folder. Inside were police reports and court documents dating back 12 years. His eyes widened as he read through the allegations made by Catherine Harrington, the senator's late wife. "Multiple domestic violence complaints," Carlo whispered, his voice hoarse. "All withdrawn under mysterious circumstances." Marcus nodded grimly. "Keep reading, it gets worse." The documents painted a chilling picture. Catherine had tried to escape several times, each attempt followed by public reconciliations orchestrated by the senator's PR team. The final report was dated just weeks before her death in what was ruled an accidental fire. "The timing, Marcus," Carlo said, connecting the dots. "Catherine died in that fire 13 years ago. The girls were left at the firehouse just months later." "There's more." Marcus pulled out another document. "My contact found Catherine's medical records. She was pregnant with triplets when she died, or at least when she was reported dead." Carlo's heart pounded as the pieces started falling into place. "She faked her death," he breathed. "She must have escaped, had the girls, and then left them somewhere she knew they'd be safe," Marcus finished. "At a firehouse, with a note asking for protection." Carlo slumped back in his chair, overwhelmed by the implications. The mysterious note, the timing, the DNA match, it all made terrible sense. Catherine had given up everything, even her identity, to keep her daughters away from Harrington. "Does Grace know any of this?" Marcus asked softly. "No," Carlo shook his head. "She's so caught up in Harrington's charm, his promises, just like her mother probably was at first." Marcus gathered the documents carefully. "We need to be strategic about this, Carlo. Harrington's powerful, And if he realizes we know, I have to protect them, Carlo said firmly. But Grace is pulling away, and I'm afraid she'll trust him before I can make her understand the truth. Then we need proof, Marcus replied. Solid evidence that even a 12-year-old can't deny. Let me make some more calls. As Marcus left, Carlo heard movement upstairs. The soft pad of feet, a door closing quietly. He wondered which of the girls had been listening and what they had heard. The weight of these dark revelations pressed down on him, making the quiet house feel suffocating. The school hallways buzzed with excitement as Grace walked alongside Sophia Reeves, whose father worked closely with Senator Harrington's campaign. Gone were the days when Grace would wait for her sisters after class, replaced now by hushed conversations with her new friend about political rallies and fancy fundraising dinners. At home, the dinner table had become uncomfortably quiet. Where once there had been cheerful chatter and shared stories, now there were just the sounds of forks scraping plates and occasional glances between Carlo and the girls. One evening, as Carlo sat on the living room couch reviewing work documents, Lily and Hope curled up beside him, one on each side. Dad? Lily's voice was soft. We love you, you know that, right? Carlo's heart squeezed. I love you girls too. More than anything. Grace is being mean, Hope added, her lower lip trembling. She says we're babies for not wanting to know about him. Carlo wrapped his arms around both girls. Everyone processes things differently. Your sister is just trying to figure things out in her own way. But we already know who our real dad is, Lily said firmly, hugging Carlo tighter. It's you. The following week, Carlo arrived early to Grace's debate competition, choosing a seat near the front. His daughter stood at the podium, confident and poised as she delivered her arguments about environmental protection. His chest swelled with pride, but then he heard the familiar sound of cameras clicking. Senator Harrington swept into the auditorium, flanked by aides and local reporters. He took a seat in the VIP section, smiling and waving to the crowd. When Grace finished her debate, winning first place, Harrington was the first to stand and applaud. Remarkable poise, he announced loudly to the gathered crowd. That's the Harrington blood showing through. We've always had a gift for public speaking. Grace beamed at the praise while Carlo's congratulatory bouquet hung limply at his side. He watched as his daughter gravitated toward Harrington, accepting his praise and posing for photos, barely acknowledging Carlo's presence. Just like her mother, Harrington continued, placing a hand on Grace's shoulder. She has that same natural grace under pressure. Carlo saw Lily and Hope watching from the back of the auditorium, their faces reflecting the same pain he felt as their sister drifted further away, pulled by Harrington's magnetic influence and calculated charm. The doorbell rang on a quiet Sunday afternoon, its chime shattering the peace of the Hart household. Victoria Crane stood on the porch, her tailored suit as sharp as her expression. She didn't wait for an invitation before stepping inside. Mr. Hart, she said, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. I think you'll find this interesting. She pulled out a thick envelope from her leather briefcase. Carlo's stomach dropped as he scanned the court documents. The words joint custody and parental rights jumped off the page. Senator Harrington believes it's in the girls' best interest to have a relationship with their biological family, Victoria said, her voice dripping with manufactured concern. We can do this the easy way, or we can let the courts decide. After she left, Carlo drove straight to Susan Alvarez's office. The family lawyer's usually calm demeanor cracked as she reviewed the papers. This isn't good, Carlo, Susan said, removing her reading glasses. Harrington has connections throughout the judicial system. His influence runs deep, and his resources are practically unlimited. What can we do? Carlo's voice was barely above a whisper. We need to prove he's unfit, Susan replied, leaning forward. The sealed records about his wife's death, the domestic abuse allegations, anything that shows he poses a danger to the girls. But we need concrete evidence, not just rumors. That evening, Carlo heard the creak of floorboards coming from upstairs. He found Grace fully dressed, climbing out her bedroom window. Where do you think you're going? His voice made her freeze. Grace turned, defiance written across her face. Senator Harrington invited me to dinner. He wants to talk about my future. Get back inside, now. Carlo's tone was firm but controlled. You can't keep controlling my life, Grace shouted, tears forming in her eyes. He understands me. He knows what I want, a real future, not just being stuck here forever. Grace, please, no. You're not my real father. You're just some guy who found us. Senator Harrington is successful, important. He can give us opportunities you never could. The words hit Carlo like physical blows. Behind Grace, he could see Lily and Hope watching from their bedroom doorway, their faces streaked with tears. The morning sun cast long shadows across Grace's empty bedroom. Her closet doors hung open, drawers pulled out, and her favorite stuffed animal, the one Carlo had given her on their first Christmas together, was missing from its place on the bed. Carlo's hands shook as he dialed Grace's number for the 10th time. Each ring echoed in his ears until the familiar voicemail message played again. In the kitchen, Lily and Hope sat at the breakfast table, their cereal going soggy and untouched. "And we should have told you she was talking to him more," Lily whispered, her voice thick with tears. "Maybe if we'd said something sooner." Hope nodded, unable to speak through her quiet sobs. Carlo knelt between their chairs, pulling both girls into a tight hug. "This is not your fault," he said firmly. "None of this is your fault. Grace made her choice, but that doesn't mean we're giving up on her." Marcus arrived within minutes of Carlo's call, his police officer friend's business card already in hand. "We're going to that estate," he said, grabbing his car keys. "Now." The drive to Harrington's mansion felt endless. Iron gates opened to reveal manicured lawns and a house that looked more like a small hotel than a home. Carlo's heart pounded as they approached the front door. A butler answered, but Harrington appeared moments later, looking perfectly composed in an expensive suit. "Mr. Hart," he said smoothly. "I assumed you'd come by eventually." "Where's Grace?" Carlo demanded, his fists clenched at his sides. "She's settling into her new room," Harrington replied. "She's quite excited about the private tutoring I've arranged. The opportunities she'll have here are substantial." Marcus put a steadying hand on Carlo's shoulder as he took a step forward. "She's 13 years old. You can't just take her." "I didn't take her, Mr. Hart. She came to me." Harrington's smile didn't reach his eyes. "She's old enough to know what she wants, and what she wants is to be with her real family." "Real family?" Carlo's voice cracked. "I've been there for every scraped knee, every nightmare, every triumph. Where were you for the past 12 years? "The past is irrelevant," Harrington said dismissively. "What matters is Grace's future, and I can provide her with everything she needs." "Everything except love," Carlo shot back. "You don't know the first thing about these girls, about who they are, what they need." "Mr. Hart," Harrington's voice turned cold, "I suggest you leave before I'm forced to call security. And know this, if you continue to pursue this, I'll file for full custody of all 3 girls. Is that what you want?" Carlo stepped closer, his voice low but firm. "Listen to me very carefully. I will fight for these girls with everything I have. You may have money and power, but I have the truth on my side, and the truth about you will come out." The house felt emptier without Grace, but Lily and Hope found comfort in going through old memories. They sat cross-legged on Grace's bedroom floor, surrounded by baby photos and treasured keepsakes. "Remember this blanket?" Hope held up the pale yellow fabric that had once wrapped all 3 of them. "It still smells like baby powder." Lily ran her fingers along the worn edges. "Dad kept everything from that night." Her voice caught as she unfolded the blanket, and something fluttered to the floor. A yellowed envelope, different from the cryptic note they'd all seen before. Hope picked it up with trembling hands. "Should we open it?" Lily nodded, and together they carefully broke the seal. The handwriting inside was rushed but clear, the paper stained with what looked like teardrops. "To whoever finds my girls," Lily read aloud, her voice shaking. "If you're reading this, I pray my daughters are safe and loved. I need to explain why I had to leave them." Carlo found them crying in Grace's room 20 minutes later. the letter clutched between them. "Girls? What's wrong?" "Dad," Hope whispered, holding out the paper. "You need to read this." As Carlo's eyes moved across the pages, his hands began to shake. The writer detailed years of abuse at Harrington's hands, controlling behavior that escalated to violence, threats that kept her silent, and finally, the desperate plan to escape when she learned she was pregnant. But it was the next paragraph that made Carlo's breath catch. "Jessica Hart was my only friend at the Fire Safety Foundation. She promised to help me escape, to find a safe place for my babies. She died in that house fire before she could, but I never forgot her kindness." "Jessica knew," Carlo whispered, sinking to his knees beside his daughters. "She knew about Harrington all along." Hope wrapped her arms around him. "There's more, Dad." The letter continued with detailed accounts of Harrington's abuse, dates, locations, and even names of witnesses who had been silenced with money or threats. The writer had documented everything, creating a paper trail that led directly to Harrington's door. Carlo immediately called Marcus, who arrived within minutes. Together they contacted Susan Alvarez, spreading the letter carefully on her office desk as they explained its significance. "This changes everything," Susan said, already taking notes. "This letter not only proves Harrington's history of abuse, but it also establishes a direct connection to your wife, Carlo. It shows a pattern of behavior that any judge would find deeply concerning." "We need to get Grace out of there," Carlo said, his voice urgent, "now that we know what he's capable of." "We'll move quickly," Susan assured him, "but we need to do this right. One wrong step and Harrington could bury this evidence like he's buried everything else." Back home, Lily and Hope sat close to Carlo on the couch, neither willing to leave his side. "Do you think Grace will believe it?" Lily asked softly. "About Senator Harrington?" Carlo pulled them closer. "Your sister is smart. Once she sees the truth about who he really is." He looked at the letter again, at the desperate words of a mother trying to protect her children. "We're going to bring her home, I promise." Susan Alvarez spread the documents across her mahogany desk, her eyes scanning each page with growing intensity. The letter, now carefully preserved in a plastic sleeve, lay at the center. "This is exactly what we needed, Carlo," she said, looking up at him with renewed confidence. "But we need to be strategic. Harrington's legal team will try to discredit everything, including you." Carlo paced the office, his hands clenched. "I want to confront him, show him we know." "That's exactly what you can't do," Susan interrupted firmly. "Any aggressive move on your part could be twisted against you. We need you to appear calm and collected, especially in front of Grace." Back at home, Lily and Hope sat in their shared bedroom, surrounded by photo albums and their dad's old camcorder. "We have to show Grace the truth," Lily said, adjusting the camera on its tripod. "About Dad, about everything." Hope nodded, holding up a photograph of Carlo teaching them to ride bikes. "Remember when he spent every Saturday for a month just running behind us?" They worked through the afternoon collecting memories, videos of Carlo reading bedtime stories, photos of him braiding their hair before school, clips from birthday parties where he'd worn silly hats just to make them laugh. "And this one," Hope said softly, pointing to a picture of Carlo asleep in his armchair, all three girls curled up against him after a nightmare. "He never left us alone when we were scared." Meanwhile, across town, Marcus Levine hunched over his computer at the firehouse, printing article after article. Headlines from local papers painted a disturbing picture. Senator's wife files police report. Later recanted. Harrington estate staff turnover raises questions. Former aide alleges hostile work environment. "Look at this," Marcus said when Carlo stopped by. He handed over a stack of testimonies from former household staff. They all described the same pattern: explosive anger, controlling behavior, threats to anyone who spoke up. "How did he keep this quiet?" Carlo asked, scanning the documents. "Money," Marcus replied grimly. "Lots of it. But people remember and they're willing to talk now." For the first time since Grace left, Carlo felt a spark of real hope. Between the letter, the mounting evidence, and his daughter's unwavering support, They had a chance to expose Harrington's true nature. When he returned home that evening, he found Lily and Hope waiting with their finished video. They sat him down on the couch and pressed play. The screen filled with images of their life together, moments big and small that showed what family really meant. "We're going to show this to Grace," Lily explained, her voice determined. "She needs to remember who her real family is." Carlo pulled his daughters close, his heart full of love and gratitude. "You girls are incredible, you know that?" "We learned from you, Dad," Hope whispered, snuggling closer. The morning headlines hit like a tidal wave. "Local firefighter struggles with teen care," screamed one newspaper. "Financial concerns cloud foster father's future," declared another. Victoria Crane's carefully orchestrated smear campaign spread across social media and local news outlets with frightening efficiency. Carlo stood in his kitchen, hands trembling as he read the latest article. The words blurred before his eyes. Sources close to the situation expressed concern over Carlo Hart's ability to provide adequate care and supervision for 3 teenage girls. Marcus Levine burst through the front door, newspaper in hand. "This is garbage, Carlo. Pure garbage. We both know who's behind this." "Victoria Crane," Carlo said quietly, setting down his coffee mug. "She's trying to paint me as an unfit father before we even get to court." Across town in Senator Harrington's sprawling estate, Grace sat in her new bedroom, scrolling through news articles on her phone. Each headline made her stomach twist a little tighter. A photo of Carlo looking exhausted after a long shift had been twisted into evidence of his inability to cope. "Troubling, isn't it?" Senator Harrington's smooth voice came from her doorway. He stepped into the room, impeccably dressed as always. "I hate to see you upset, but you needed to know the truth about your situation." Grace hugged her knees to her chest. "But Dad, Carlo, he always took care of us." "Of course he did his best," Harrington said, sitting on the edge of her bed. "But don't you see? He kept you from knowing who you really are, your true heritage. He was afraid of losing you to your real family." The words burrowed into Grace's mind, feeding her doubts. Yet she couldn't shake the memory of Carlo teaching her to ride a bike, staying up all night when she had the flu, proudly displaying her artwork on the refrigerator. After days of relentless negative press, Carlo made a decision. He called the local news station that had been requesting an interview. "I'm done hiding," he told Marcus. "Those girls deserve to hear the truth from me, not through some twisted version in the papers." The interview was set for that evening. Carlo sat under the bright studio lights, facing the sympathetic reporter. His hands were steady now, his voice clear and strong. "12 years ago," he began, "3 beautiful baby girls were left at my firehouse. The note said, 'Protect them at all costs.' And that's exactly what I've done every day since." As he spoke, photos appeared on screen. The girls' first steps, first day of school, family vacations. Carlo's voice cracked with emotion as he described midnight feedings, kindergarten graduations, and the countless small moments that made up their life together. "I'm not perfect," he admitted. "I'm just a firefighter who found himself blessed with 3 daughters. Everything I've done, every choice I've made, has been to give them the love and security they deserve." In Harrington's mansion, Grace watched the interview on her laptop, tears streaming down her face. She saw the genuine love in Carlo's eyes, heard the truth in his voice as he described their family. "They say I can't provide what these girls need," Carlo continued on screen. "But what they need most isn't fancy houses or political connections. What they need is love, stability, and someone who will always put them first. That's what I've given them, and that's what I'll keep giving them no matter what." The camera caught a tear rolling down Carlo's cheek as he added, "Grace, if you're watching this, you will always be my daughter. Nothing can change that. Not money, not politics, not blood. Love made us family, and love will keep us family." Susan Alvarez's hands shook as she held the yellow document. The law office's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead while she read the fire report again, making sure she hadn't misunderstood its significance. "Carlo," she called, her voice urgent. "You need to see this." Carlo leaned over her desk, scanning the document. His heart nearly stopped when he saw Jessica's name. The report detailed how his late wife had responded to a house fire at a private residence. She had rescued a woman and 3 newborn babies from the blaze. The address, Susan pointed out. It matches one of Harrington's properties. And look at the date. It's exactly when the triplets were born. Carlos sank into a chair, memories of Jessica flooding back. She had come home that night, unusually quiet. When he'd asked about her shift, she just hugged him tightly and whispered, "Sometimes we save more than just lives." The fire was covered up, Susan explained, shuffling through more papers. The official report says it was an electrical malfunction, but there are witness statements suggesting otherwise. And the woman Jessica rescued, she was Harrington's wife. Marcus Levine, who had been standing quietly by the window, stepped forward. That's why the note said, "Protect them at all costs." Their mother knew they'd never be safe with Harrington. That evening, Carlo sat with Lily and Hope in their living room. Family photos lined the walls, including one of Jessica in her firefighter uniform, smiling brightly at the camera. "Girls," Carlo began softly, "I need to tell you something about Jessica, about your connection to her." Lily and Hope moved closer, sensing the importance of the moment. As Carlo shared the story of how Jessica had saved them and their biological mother, tears rolled down their cheeks. "So she saved us?" Lily whispered, looking up at Jessica's photo. "Before we even became your daughters?" "She did," Carlo replied, his voice thick with emotion. "And somehow, years later, you found your way back to me. I think Jessica knew even then that we were meant to be a family." Hope reached for Carlo's hand. "Dad, it's like she brought us together, like she made sure we'd have you to protect us." "That's exactly what she did," Carlo agreed, pulling both girls close. "And I promise you, I'll never stop fighting to keep our family together. We'll bring Grace home, too." The 3 of them sat together, drawing strength from their shared bond and the newfound knowledge of Jessica's role in their lives. The truth of their connection had given them something powerful, a reminder that their family was formed not just by chance but by love and sacrifice. The courthouse buzzed with tension as people filled the wooden benches. Carlos sat at the plaintiff's table, his shoulders straight despite the weight pressing down on him. Lily and Hope clutched each other's hands in the front row, their faces pale with worry. Victoria Crane rose first, her designer suit immaculate as she addressed the judge. "Senator Harrington can provide these girls with opportunities beyond measure," she declared, her voice smooth as silk. "Private education, cultural experiences, connections that will secure their futures. Why deny them their rightful heritage?" She presented glossy photos of Harrington's estate, emphasizing the separate wing he'd already prepared for the girls. "This is the life they deserve," she said, casting a dismissive glance at Carlo. When Susan Alvarez stood, she carried only a worn envelope. "Your Honor, I'd like to present evidence that will show exactly why these girls were left at that firehouse 12 years ago." She revealed the letter, reading the mother's desperate words aloud. The courtroom fell silent as descriptions of Harrington's abuse echoed through the chamber. Harrington's face remained stoic, but his jaw tightened visibly. Susan detailed the pattern of violence, the covered-up incidents, and the mother's desperate flight to save her babies. When Carlo took the stand, his voice trembled slightly before finding its strength. "I didn't choose to be their father at first," he admitted. "They chose me. Every midnight feeding, every scraped knee, every nightmare. We built our family one moment at a time." Tears welled in his eyes as he spoke about Jessica. "My wife died saving others. She taught me that protecting people isn't just about running into burning buildings. Sometimes it's about opening your heart, even when you're scared." Grace sat in the witness box, her hands fidgeting in her lap. She looked between Carlo and Harrington, her young face troubled. "Senator Harrington promised me everything I ever wanted," she said softly. "But," her voice cracked, "Dad, Carlo, he gave me everything I ever needed." She wiped her eyes with her sleeve, looking younger than her 12 years. "When I was little and had nightmares, he'd sit with me until I fell asleep. He learned to braid my hair even though he was terrible at it. He never missed a school play even if he had to come straight from the firehouse still smelling like smoke." The courtroom remained hushed as Grace continued. Senator Harrington talks about giving us a better life, but she looked directly at Carlo, her chin trembling. We already had the best life. I just didn't see it until I left. During the court recess, Grace wandered the quiet hallway, her footsteps echoing against the marble floors. Her mind swirled with conflicting emotions when angry voices from around the corner caught her attention. She recognized Harrington's sharp tone immediately. "I don't care about the girl's feelings," Harrington snapped at Victoria Crane. "This is about securing my legacy. Once we win this case, we'll ship them off to boarding school. Out of sight, out of mind." Victoria's voice was hushed but firm. "Senator, please lower your voice. The optics—" "Optics?" Harrington scoffed. "That's all this has ever been about. These girls are nothing but pawns. That foolish firefighter actually believes in love and family. How quaint." Grace pressed herself against the wall, her heart pounding. Tears welled in her eyes as the truth of Harrington's character crashed over her. All his promises, all his charm. It had been a carefully crafted lie. "Grace?" a soft voice called out. She turned to find Lily and Hope approaching, holding a tablet between them. "We made something," Lily said, her voice gentle. "Will you watch it with us?" Grace nodded, wiping her eyes as her sisters led her to a quiet bench. Hope pressed play on the tablet, and suddenly their childhood filled the screen. The video showed Carlo teaching them to ride bikes, his hands steady on their handlebars. Another clip captured him attempting to braid Grace's hair, his tongue sticking out in concentration as she giggled. There were moments of him reading bedtime stories, making pancakes in funny shapes, and bandaging scraped knees. "Remember when he worked double shifts to buy us those science camp tickets?" Hope's voice narrated over a clip of Carlo falling asleep at the breakfast table, still in his firefighter uniform. Tears streamed down Grace's face as she watched Carlo dancing with them at their school father-daughter dance, his movements awkward, but his smile radiant. The video ended with a recent clip of him sitting alone on their porch swing, staring at her empty spot at the dinner table. When court resumed, Grace requested to speak again. Judge Martinez nodded, and Grace returned to the witness stand. Her hands were steady now, her voice clear. "I want to go home," she announced, looking directly at Carlo. "With my real father, the one who's been there every single day, who loves us for who we are, not what we represent." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Harrington's face darkened as Grace continued. "Senator Harrington offered me a mansion, but Dad gave me a home. He offered me connections, but Dad gave me roots. He promised me success, but Dad taught me about love." Grace's voice grew stronger with each word. "I was wrong to leave. Dad might not be perfect, but he's perfect for us." Carlo couldn't hold back his tears as Grace spoke. Lily and Hope clutched each other, crying quietly in the gallery. "The senator talks about providing opportunities," Grace said, her young voice filled with wisdom beyond her years. "But the greatest opportunity I've ever had was being raised by a man who showed me what real strength looks like, not in power or money, but in loving someone enough to put them first, every single day." The gallery burst into murmurs as Harrington's carefully constructed facade began to crack. His knuckles turned white as he gripped the table, watching his case dissolve with each word from Grace's mouth. Susan Alvarez approached the bench with measured steps, a weathered manila envelope held carefully in her hands. The courtroom fell silent as she presented the sealed document to Judge Martinez. "Your Honor, this document was sealed 12 years ago," Susan explained, her voice steady. "It contains the original fire department report from the night of Margaret Harrington's death, along with witness statements that were mysteriously removed from public record." The judge carefully reviewed the contents, her expression growing grave. "These are serious allegations, Ms. Alvarez. Please proceed." Susan turned to face the courtroom. "This report shows that the fire that claimed Margaret Harrington's life wasn't accidental. Witnesses saw Mrs. Harrington attempting to flee with 3 newborn babies. Jessica Hart, a fire safety educator who died saving others that night, helped Margaret escape." Harrington's face contorted with rage as Susan continued reading from the document. Margaret Harrington had filed multiple domestic violence reports in the weeks leading up to the fire. She feared for her life and the lives of her newborn triplets. "Objection!" Victoria Crane shot to her feet. "These documents were sealed." "Because Senator Harrington's legal team buried them," Susan countered. "But they were never destroyed, Your Honor. The truth remained, waiting to protect these girls one final time." Harrington suddenly slammed his fist on the table. "This is absurd. I won't sit here and listen to these lies." His carefully maintained composure shattered like glass. "You will maintain order in my courtroom, Senator," Judge Martinez warned sharply. But Harrington was beyond control. "Those girls are mine. Their mother was weak, just like they are." His face had turned an ugly shade of red as he pointed at Grace. "You ungrateful child. After everything I offered you." "Senator Harrington!" The judge's gavel cracked like thunder. "One more outburst and I'll have you removed from this courtroom." Grace instinctively moved closer to Carlo, who wrapped a protective arm around her shoulders. Lily and Hope gripped each other's hands tightly as they watched their biological father's true nature emerge. "The evidence is clear," Judge Martinez declared, her voice firm. "Not only does Mr. Hart provide a loving, stable home for these children, but there is substantial proof that Senator Harrington poses a genuine threat to their well-being." She turned to address Carlo directly. "Mr. Hart, this court grants you full legal custody of Grace, Lily, and Hope." The gallery erupted in applause. Carlo pulled all three girls into a tight embrace as tears streamed down their faces. "We're going home," he whispered. "All of us. Together." Harrington stormed out of the courtroom, shoving past reporters who had gathered outside. Victoria Crane quietly packed her briefcase, avoiding eye contact with anyone as she slipped away. As the Hart family made their way out of the courthouse, they were surrounded by supporters. Fellow firefighters from Carlo's station formed a protective circle around them. Marcus Levine beamed with pride as he helped clear a path through the crowd. "Dad," Grace said, clinging to Carlo's arm as they walked. "I'm so sorry I ever doubted." "Shh," Carlo soothed, pulling her closer. "You're here now. That's all that matters." Reporters called out questions, but Carlo focused only on his daughters. Hope skipped alongside them, her natural joy restored, while Lily walked with her head held high, occasionally squeezing her father's hand. The afternoon sun bathed them in warm light as they descended the courthouse steps, a family bound not by blood but by something far stronger, the kind of love that chooses to stay, to fight, to protect, no matter what storms may come. The drive home from the courthouse was quiet, filled with a mixture of relief and lingering tension. Grace sat in the passenger seat beside Carlo, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her sweater. In the back, Lily and Hope exchanged knowing glances, understanding their sister needed time to process everything. When they pulled into their driveway, the familiar sight of their modest two-story home brought tears to Grace's eyes. The hanging basket of purple petunias she'd helped plant last spring still swayed gently in the breeze, a reminder of happier times. Inside, Grace lingered in the entryway while her sisters headed upstairs to change. Carlo noticed her hesitation and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "I messed everything up," Grace whispered, her voice trembling. "I believed his lies and almost tore our family apart." Carlo guided her to the living room couch, where they'd spent countless evenings watching movies and sharing stories. "Come here, sweetheart." Grace sat down, pulling her knees to her chest like she used to do when she was younger. "How can you even look at me after what I did?" "Grace," Carlo said softly, "you were trying to understand where you came from. That's natural. What matters is that when you saw the truth, you had the courage to stand up for it." "But I hurt you," she insisted, wiping away tears. "I said terrible things." "Being a family isn't about never making mistakes," Carlo explained, reaching for the photo album on the coffee table. He opened it to show a picture of Grace's first dance recital, where she'd forgotten her steps, but finished the routine anyway. It's about loving each other through them. Lily and Hope came downstairs, now in comfortable clothes. Hope carried a stack of DVDs while Lily brought down their favorite blankets. "Movie night?" Hope suggested, her smile brightening the room. "Like we used to do?" Grace looked up at her sisters, overwhelmed by their forgiveness. "You guys don't hate me?" Of course not, Lily said, settling beside Grace. We're triplets. We stick together. Carlo watched as his daughters arranged themselves on the couch, making space for him in their midst. Hope started sorting through their collection of feel-good movies while Lily distributed the blankets. Remember when Dad tried to make us popcorn that one time? Hope giggled. And the smoke alarm went off? That was one time, Carlo protested with a smile. And I've improved since then. Grace leaned against his shoulder, the way she used to before everything happened. Can we maybe put up some new photos? She asked hesitantly. Start fresh? I'd like that, Carlo replied, wrapping an arm around her. We can make this home feel like ours again. The familiar opening music of their favorite movie filled the room as the family huddled together on the couch, their bond battered but unbroken, ready to heal and grow stronger. The morning newspaper landed on Carlo's doorstep with a dull thud. The headline made his stomach clench. Questions raised about firefighters' fitness as parent. Senator Harrington's smear campaign had begun. Don't read that trash, Marcus Levine said, snatching up the paper before Carlo could reach for it. He'd stopped by early, knowing his friend would need support. We're not letting him win this one. Inside, Grace was making breakfast with her sisters when she saw the newspaper through the window. Her face fell. This is my fault. If I hadn't trusted him... No, Lily interrupted, flipping a pancake with determination. It's his fault for being a terrible person. Hope nodded vigorously. And we're going to prove it. Marcus shared his plan over breakfast. The whole firehouse wants to help. We're organizing a community event to show everyone who you really are, Carlo. The event came together quickly. The local park filled with families, firefighters, and neighbors. Banners proclaimed "Standing with the Hearts" while children played on the fire trucks Carlo had helped maintain for years. Grace was the first to take the microphone, her hands trembling but her voice strong. My dad, because that's who Carlo Hart is to me, saved us twice. First, when he took in 3 crying babies nobody wanted, and again when he fought to keep us safe from someone who only wanted to use us. Lily spoke next, describing nights when Carlo sat up with them during thunderstorms, and mornings when he braided their hair before school, even though it took him months to learn how. Hope's speech brought tears to many eyes. Some people think family is about DNA, she said, but it's about who shows up every day, who loves you even when you're difficult, who makes you feel safe. That's our dad. The crowd's response was overwhelming. Videos of the speeches went viral, flooding social media with messages of support. Local news stations picked up the story, focusing on Carlo's years of service to the community and his dedication as a single father. When investigative reporters began digging into Harrington's past, they uncovered a pattern of corruption and abuse that extended far beyond his treatment of his late wife. His carefully crafted public image crumbled as former employees and associates came forward with their stories. At home that evening, Carlo found his daughters watching one of the viral videos on their phones. Did you see how many people came? Hope asked excitedly. I saw, Carlo replied, his voice thick with emotion. Grace looked up at him. Harrington thought he could make people doubt you, but he didn't understand that real love leaves evidence. It's in everything you've done for us. Lily wrapped her arms around Carlo. You can't fake 12 years of bedtime stories and Band-Aids and being there every single time we needed you. The girls' phones buzzed with more notifications as their speeches continued to spread, each share and comment another blow to Harrington's desperate attempts to maintain control of the narrative. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the highway as Carlo's SUV headed north. In the passenger seat, Grace held a worn photo album, while Lily and Hope leaned forward from the back, eager to see each picture. This was your first camping trip, Carlo said, gesturing to a photo of Jessica standing by a crystal-clear lake. She loved this spot. Said it was where she felt closest to heaven. The girls exchanged knowing glances. They'd packed something special in their bags for this journey, but kept quiet about their surprise. Their first stop was the lakeside campground. As they walked the shoreline, Carlo shared stories of Jessica's love for nature and her belief that every sunset was a gift. She would have adored you three, he said softly. She had so much love to give. The next day, they visited the firehouse where their story began. The brick building stood just as it had 12 years ago, though the paint was fresher. Inside, the familiar scent of coffee and gear polish brought tears to Carlo's eyes. "This exact spot," he said, pointing to a place near the entrance. "Right here is where I found you." The girls pulled out an envelope they'd prepared. Inside was a letter thanking the firefighters who had supported Carlo through those early days of parenthood. Grace read it aloud, her voice steady and clear. "Dear Station 12 family, thank you for being there when our dad needed you most. Thank you for teaching him how to warm bottles between calls, for covering his shifts when we were sick, and for becoming our extended family." They left the letter pinned to the bulletin board, where a photo of baby Grace, Lily, and Hope still hung, faded but treasured. Their final stop was Jessica's favorite park, where she used to conduct fire safety demonstrations for local schools. While Carlo sat on a bench, lost in memories, the girls put their secret plan into action. "Dad," Hope called out, "we have something to show you." They led him to a young maple tree freshly planted near the park's entrance. A small plaque at its base read, "In loving memory of Jessica Hart, whose courage and love continue to grow through the family she helped create." Carlo stood silent, tears streaming down his face. The girls hugged him tight, forming a circle of warmth and support. "We wanted to give her a living memorial," Lily explained. "Something that will grow stronger every year, just like us," Grace added. Hope squeezed his hand. "And something that gives shade and protection to others, just like she did." Carlo pulled his daughters closer, feeling Jessica's presence in the rustle of new leaves above them. In that moment, their family felt complete, not despite their unusual beginning, but because of it. Grace stood at her locker, taking a deep breath before facing her classmates again. The hallway buzzed with morning activity, but this time felt different. She wasn't hiding anymore. "Hey," said her friend Sarah, approaching cautiously. "We missed you." Grace smiled, remembering Carlo's words about second chances. "I missed you too, and I'm sorry I pushed everyone away." Lily and Hope flanked their sister, their presence giving her strength. The three of them had grown closer through their ordeal, understanding now that their bond was unbreakable. "We're having a study group later," Sarah offered. "Want to join?" "I'd like that," Grace replied, feeling the weight of past weeks lifting from her shoulders. Across town at the community center, Carlo arranged chairs in a semicircle, preparing for his first fire safety class. Jessica's old teaching materials were spread across a table, carefully preserved pamphlets and demonstration tools that still carried her touch. "Need help with those, Dad?" Hope called out, entering with Lily and Grace after school. The girls immediately started organizing handouts and setting up the demonstration area. "Just like Mom used to do it," Grace said softly, smoothing a poster about smoke detector maintenance. The room slowly filled with families, their curious faces reminding Carlo of Jessica's passion for community education. He shared practical safety tips but also wove in personal stories, speaking from both professional and personal experience. "Sometimes the most important thing isn't the equipment," he told the group, glancing at his daughters. "It's knowing what you're fighting for." After the session, a woman approached them, notebook in hand. "I'm Claire Matthews from the local Herald," she introduced herself. "Your story has touched so many people. Would you consider letting me write about your family's journey?" Carlo hesitated, looking at his girls. They had been through so much publicity already. "It's okay, Dad," Lily said, understanding his concern. "Maybe it will help other families stay strong when things get tough." Hope nodded enthusiastically. "Plus, we can talk about the community center programs." Grace stepped forward, her expression serious. "And maybe it will show people that real family isn't about DNA. It's about love." Carlo felt pride swell in his chest, seeing the wisdom and compassion his daughters had developed. "All right," he agreed, turning to Claire. "But the story has to be about more than just us. It's about this whole community and how they helped 3 little girls and 1 lost firefighter become a family." The girls gathered around him, their presence a testament to the journey they had shared. The community center hummed with activity around them. a reminder of the life they had built together, stronger for having weathered the storm. The Hart's backyard buzzed with joy and laughter as strings of twinkling lights cast a warm glow over the gathered crowd. Balloons in shades of purple, pink, and yellow, one color for each of the triplets, bobbed gently in the evening breeze. Carlo watched from near the grill as Grace, Lily, and Hope moved through their guests, their faces glowing with happiness. Each girl had chosen a different party dress, but they still managed to look connected like pieces of the same beautiful puzzle. Marcus Levine clinked his glass, drawing everyone's attention. The veteran firefighter's eyes were misty as he raised his drink. 13 years ago, 3 tiny babies showed up at our firehouse, and my friend Carlo Hart became the father they needed, not because he had to, but because his heart told him it was right. The crowd grew quiet, hanging on Marcus's words. I've watched him fight fires, save lives, but nothing compares to the courage he's shown in raising these incredible young ladies. To Carlo and his girls, you remind us what family truly means. Cheers erupted, and Carlo felt his chest tighten with emotion. The triplets made their way to the small platform they'd set up for karaoke, but instead of singing, they each took turns speaking. Hope went first, her bubbly personality shining through. Dad, you taught us that laughter can heal anything. Even when things were scary, you made us feel safe and loved. Lily stepped forward next, her quiet voice steady and sure. You showed us what strength really looks like. Not just the kind that fights fires, but the kind that fights for what's right, for family. Grace took the microphone last, tears already streaming down her face. I tested that love more than anyone, but you never gave up on me. You're not just the dad who chose us, you're the dad who keeps choosing us, every single day. There wasn't a dry eye in the crowd. Carlo opened his arms and the girls rushed to him, creating a group hug that said more than words ever could. Their guests applauded, many wiping away tears of their own. As the party continued into the evening, the family found themselves sitting together on their favorite garden bench. The stars twinkled overhead, and the soft murmur of happy conversations drifted from the remaining party guests. Remember when you used to tell us stories about the constellations? Hope asked, leaning against Carlo's shoulder. And how you'd make up silly names for them when you couldn't remember the real ones, Lily added with a giggle. Grace squeezed Carlo's hand. Those stories always made us feel better no matter what was happening. Well, Carlo said, his voice thick with emotion, you 3 are my brightest stars. Always have been, always will be. They sat together, surrounded by the love of their community, their bond stronger than ever. The birthday candles had long since been blown out, but the warmth of their celebration continued to glow in their hearts. The morning sun streamed through the living room windows as Carlo carefully lifted the new family portrait. The professional photograph captured them perfectly, all 4 hearts smiling naturally, their happiness genuine and unforced. In the image, Grace sat between her sisters, her eyes twinkling with the same determination that had brought her back home. Lily leaned slightly toward Hope, their matching grins reflecting their unshakable bond. And Carlo stood behind them, his hands resting proudly on their shoulders. A little to the left, Dad, Grace called from where she stood watching. She held something behind her back, barely containing her excitement. Once the portrait hung perfectly centered, Carlo stepped back to admire it. The wall told their story. Older photos showing 3 tiny babies, then toddlers, then growing girls, and now these confident young teenagers. Each image marked a chapter in their journey. We have something for you, Grace said, finally revealing a handmade scrapbook bound in leather. The cover read, Our Family Story, in carefully painted letters. Carlo sat on the couch and the girls crowded around him as he opened it. The first page held the journalist's feature story, its headline bold and clear. A Father's Love, the firefighter who raised 3 miracles. Keep going, Hope urged, bouncing slightly with anticipation. Each page brought fresh tears to Carlo's eyes. Lily had included her sketches of their favorite moments, movie nights, breakfast pancake disasters, and camping trips in the backyard. Hope had written funny captions beneath old photographs, capturing their inside jokes and silly traditions. Grace's contribution touched him deepest. She'd written letters for every year he'd been their father, expressing thoughts and feelings she'd never said aloud. "Even when I was angry," one letter read, "I never stopped loving you. You taught me that real love means fighting for each other no matter what." "This is," Carlo's voice cracked with emotion, "this is perfect." "There's one more thing," Lily said softly. She turned to the last page, where a recent photo showed Jessica's memorial tree, now growing strong and tall. "Let's go visit," Hope suggested, already heading for their shoes. Together, they stepped out into the bright morning. Carlo held Hope's hand on his left and Grace's on his right, while Lily linked arms with her sisters. They walked in step, their shadows merging on the sidewalk, heading toward the park where Jessica's tree stood as a testament to their love and resilience. If you enjoyed the story of Carlo and the Triplets, I handpicked this next story that will touch your heart. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.